Well, welcome to LEAD21. It's going to be LEAD22 next year, and the year after that is going to be LEAD23, and then maybe the year after that will be LEAD24, and maybe LEAD25. You guys get the point? Okay, so it's whatever year it is, we want to stick this as a thing in our diaries, because I know you guys have your leadership conference around October, or Impact, which we're going to try to get as many of our churches there when it does happen again. Not this year. Next year, we're going to go huge. 10,000 people. But for me, it's just the heart behind why we're doing this is, the church is growing. If you guys seen, we're having a bunch of new people coming. God clearly spoke to me about wineskin, and it's wineskin for me is really about more leaders. And we just want to create a space where you have Rob and Alette that come in, and we'll get different people every year. Maybe they'll come every year. And they just come and they bring a sense of just the bigness of who God is, ignite something in our hearts for us as leaders to step into the greater things that God has for us. And I preach this a lot, but my heart is to see every single person in City Lights rise up into all that God has made them to be. And if I look around the room, there's probably about half of you that are currently leading, maybe another half that are going to step into leadership. I'm saying, what Rob was saying yesterday, put your hand up. I was speaking to someone this morning about starting something in Murdoch. We're going to go massive. We're going to maybe plant a church there. Who knows? But this is exciting. But could I ask Rob and Alette to come up? We've got about a half an hour before a snack break. We've got trays of samosas and sausage rolls. And but this is the main course. That's dessert, okay? Let's just see if that's working. Do you want to have a little go there? Just so we... Okay. Yeah, it is working. Cool. So, I always love an interview format just because Rob is going to preach the next session, and I'm sure it's going to be power. And I asked Alette yesterday, have you got a word for this morning? And she goes, no, that's fine. I'll just do the interview. But what I love about you guys is how you minister as a couple. I mean, Alette, you get up and you like open up something over the congregation, both yesterday in both meetings and today. It's like, that is just such an incredible gift. And I love seeing partners in ministry. Anyway, so I'm going to start because I've got a list of questions here. And it's good for us to get to know you because I think you are just obviously key in our lives, but more and more I think you will be going forward as a church and as City Lights. So just quickly for both of you, this is like short little popcorn questions. Just when you got saved and how you got together. Either of you can answer.
I'll do the quick questions. Rob takes time to answer. I got saved when I was about 16 in a youth meeting, but not unfortunately. I grew up in a very traditional church, so I got to the saying yes, but the follow me took quite a long time. Rob and I met at Stellenbosch the last 3 months of Stellenbosch, for those who do not know, in South Africa, university, and we met the last 3 months of varsity.
It was love at first sight with you. Look at that
Something
handsome
like that. Man. It took a while.
It didn't take her a while. She invited me on the first date.
Started the same.
You can't lie in church. I got saved in 1997. I had been in church for 27 years, but I was never saved. And I'd heard the gospel. I even loved the gospel. I used to even defend Jesus against my friends, and I wasn't saved. But I just never knew what it actually meant. And even though I'd understood it, one day God had to humble me, and he did. And let me just say this to you, it's better to humble yourself than let God humble you. And he gives grace to the humble. And I had to be broken. And I remember going through 18 interviews and getting rejected one after the other, looking for a job after university, and having done all these, I'd done a lot of things. And then by the 18th no, I was in my bedroom on my own. Alette was an incredible captain in the Air Force, and I was at home because I was out of a job. And in a place called Boertastraat, in number 6, and I bowed down just next to my bed after this, I don't know how many rejection, and just said, Jesus, I'm fighting enough. I've fought with you enough now. Now I give up. And I said, and I got saved. And that afternoon, so there was no one there except God. And that afternoon, Alette came back from work, and I said, I have to tell you something. And from that Sunday, we went to the church, which was 4 houses down from us, which was this big Dutch Reformed church. And it's where I grew up. And so it was an incredible start. And that's how it happened. So 1997, and I was very grateful. 3 months after we got married, she married a sinner. So God was very gracious to us.
It was the flirt to convert, fully realized. But just, sorry, you said something in passing. You were a captain in the Air Force. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit? That's just, you don't just talk about that. That's just like...
Okay, I grew up in an Air Force home. My dad was quite high up in the Air Force. After school, I joined the Army for a year at the Women's College in George, just because I didn't know what to do and I thought it's fun. Then I joined another year, short service they called it, where I made some money. Then I went to university and I joined the Air Force. I was a communication officer, but I did learn how to march and how to shoot and all those things. And when my daughter was born, about a couple months after, I resigned. I said, that's enough.
That's so cool. So fast forward a few years, you guys end up in Qatar. Do you want to just talk about just either of you can, but just your journey in Qatar, finding church, and then kind of walking into the call of God?
So about 2 weeks before we moved to Qatar, in fact, when we started praying, when I was 30, and I'd had a good job and things were good and we had babies and lekker house, and suddenly one day I had my 30th birthday, and I remember saying to Clet, is this it? Surely there's more. I said, one day I'm going to be 40 and it's still going to be this. And I'd known Jesus, but I did not really understand what it meant to really follow him and to really be filled by his power. And so I desired more, but didn't know more. And then one night I just woke up the next morning and said, what about Dubai? I nearly came here. And God used what I knew, which was Dubai, or I only heard of, and brought us through Dubai, and actually we ended up in Doha. And when they said, you're actually not going to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, but Doha, we said, where's that? And in 2002, that was a where's that? And then just before we flew, I had a cousin one day phone me and he said, I've got a word for you. And I said, yeah, what does that mean? And because, I don't really know what that means. And he said, God's already there, where you're going. And I thought, well, if that's a prophetic word, that sounds pathetic, because isn't he supposed to be everywhere? But I didn't understand it. And so we arrived in Doha. It was just about internet days. There was no email, nothing. Or maybe there was, but we didn't know anything. And there was you didn't know where the church was. We didn't know there was a church. And amazingly, within 2 days of arriving in our compound where we stayed, we met a couple called Gijs and Magda Dutoy. And we went and I said, and we had tea with them, and I said, is there a church here? And they said, you're one of those guys. And they said, come, we'll take you to someone. And then they took us to Wessel and Charlene van Wyk. You can't believe, we're going to the Middle East, to the desert, and we're finding all these names. I'm thinking, how's that possible? And they said, look, it was Thursday, tomorrow's church. And honestly, when we went to church the next day, they were very frightened for us. They thought we'd run away, knowing we'd come from the Dutch Reformed Church. And when I walked into the building, there was Dave standing, Dave Wallen, and I just felt in my heart God say, this is what I said when I said, I'm already there where you're going. And I never went anywhere else. And we just knew that was home. That's how it happened.
Can I add something? So I was quite far pregnant with my son. And 6 weeks after we arrived in Doha, he was born with emergency cesarean. And the church was the people that got us through this. The church surrounded us. They looked after my other two. They provided food. They visited me. He was in ICU in another hospital. They came to pray for him. And I just look back, although the first couple weeks in church for me was strange, and people singing in tongues, and I'll sing in Afrikaans, and didn't understand these things, God used kindness of other people and community to really to slot our hearts into this community and say, this is what I have for you. So I just want to encourage, actually, that kindness is an amazing key into the kingdom of God.
I just want to on that, when he was born, my son was born prematurely and he was very ill. And 2 hours after being born, he had to be transferred to the big state hospital. And so it was emergency. So it was a Saturday morning, I was in my shorts and my flip-flops or whatever it was, and in the ambulance with my boy going to this big hospital. Now, this is 2003, and it's a long time ago, and I get to the big hospital, and we're in emergency, and they rush my boy in this, whatever, incubator type thing, and the security guard comes at the door and he says, stop, you can't go in, you got shorts on. And honestly, I thought, I'm going to punch you right now. I was like, and so he said, you can't come in. I'm saying, my boy's emergency. Do you think I planned and got dressed to come to church, to a hospital? And those days, there wasn't even taxis really in Qatar. And then I had to get a taxi, and it was chaos. But after about an hour and a half, eventually getting home, putting on longs, coming back to, now I had to go and search for my son. And this massive big building, I don't know where he was. So I searched, and about half an hour later, I eventually found him. And I'm standing there, and in those next, he was 4 days in ICU. And I stood there in that ICU in those days. And then one day, I'm standing there one morning, and I'm weeping. And honestly, all the clothes for the hospital was made for little Chinese men and Nepalis. And so I had to get into this little pink thing standing there, and I couldn't fit into it, and I got a little mask on. And I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, God, what have I done? Helette's weeping in the hospital. She can't see her boy. The Iraq war just broken out. We can't get our parents here. I've got a boy in ICU. My other kids, it was just suddenly all over me, and I thought I've destroyed my family. And suddenly I was standing there, and I'm weeping. And someone comes in to the ICU and says, hello, Rob. And I said, who are you? And they said, we're in church with you. I said, but I don't know you. He said, don't worry, we know you. Can we pray for your boy? I said, sure. And this couple came, and they were there praying, and I just wept, and they left. 15 minutes later, someone said, hello, Rob. I said, who are you? So we're in church with you. I said, I don't know you. So come. And 4 people came. I don't know if they were angels or real people. But they just came, and I stood there, and I thought, if I'd been in Pretoria, I don't even know if I would have had people that would come and do that. Not because it's Pretoria, but just where we were in God. And the church just absolutely blew us away through its love and kindness. And we fell in love with something we didn't even know what it was. But we knew that was so powerful. It was powerful for us.
Were they Afrikaans angels? Or?
One was a little Indian one.
Just kind of off that story, because I really do love people's stories and kind of how God leads them, because I think there's people in the room here that are in totally different spaces in their lives. But you obviously were part of the church, but then, man, you come there for business, health and safety, am I correct? Something like that?
Yeah, yes.
And but then God kind of propels you into this calling, and now you're leading this incredible church. You guys have an incredible apostolic call. That's doesn't just happen. How did that happen for you guys? If you want to just talk briefly, a few little stages in that.
Yeah, I think the first real, where God got hold of our hearts, about 3 months being in Doha, our open home, we knew about a home group in South Africa. So that's what we immediately joined a home group, and that was great for us. And then our open home leader said to us, there's a prophetic lady coming. I thought, what on earth is this? But anyway, he encouraged us, and we went to this meeting, and incredible preach. Then she said, anyone want a word? I said, Rob, there's no ways. We're not moving. And we are trying to hide, but we're quite tall. You can't really hide. And then she pointed to us, and she said, would you stand up? And she started prophesying over Rob, but just not prophesying future in a way, just where he was. And she was saying these things, and it's extraordinary. But I didn't really hear. I just said, please, God, let her not say anything about me, nothing. And then she turned to me, and she was so spot on of where I was in God and in life. And we left there, and we knew that God has spoken. And he hasn't spoken about future so much, but God has spoken, he knew us, and there's a plan. And I think that ignited something in us of, okay, as we said to the guys picking us up this morning, is actually we decided, well, we've got nothing to lose. We just boots and all, and if we don't like it, we just go back to South Africa. And we just, when there's a meeting, when there's a time for prayer, for Holy Spirit, whatever it was, we just actually said, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to see what God has for us. That's quick in a nutshell.
Yeah, we just said we're going to go for it. We've got nothing to lose. What can we lose? And we were like sponges. And when they said get baptized, okay, it did take about 3 weeks for me, but then we got baptized. And we didn't see the doves come down, and we didn't hear lightning bolts. But we just knew that day that the devil could never accuse us again of that. Just knew, boom, it's done, settled. And then it wasn't weeks later, suddenly there was a Keir Taylor came, and there was the Holy Spirit, and he said, who wants to be filled with the Spirit? I said, I don't know what it is, but I'm coming. And I ran forward. And that night I started speaking in tongues. I was touched by the Spirit. And I went home. We were getting in the car and I'm going, let's next to me. I'm going, "Whoa, and I said, she says, "Ah, man, play still." And she said, "Keep quiet." Because she hadn't been filled with this. And we're in the car and she's upset with me. And 3 weeks later, Hilette goes to church and she'd had beef with one of the elders' wives. And yeah, not quite beef. Let's say she had lamb with all, but it wasn't so bad. But she went, she felt convicted of God. She went and made right with that lady. She got in a car, drove home. At the traffic light, the Spirit of God comes upon Hilette and she starts to speak in tongues. No one around her, just spontaneously in the car. And God just absolutely rocked us. We didn't know what was going on, but we just said, we're in God. Boom. And so we didn't know.
I just feel to encourage, because I came from a very traditional family and background, it took me 7-8 months before I told my parents I got baptized. And I was so every time scared of, telling them what God is doing. And then when I eventually did it, they were so happy for me because they could see the change and they could see what God is doing. So, and I remember at one point my mom asking us, we were in Doha, and she said, "What culture are your kids growing up in? This Arab culture and the British system?" And we said, "No, it's kingdom culture." Amazing. Kingdom culture. So I want to encourage you, don't let your past or your traditions or family prevent you from walking in what God has for you. Because if God is calling, the rest will fall in place, and the parents will understand because they will just be so happy to see actually what God is doing in your life.
Hilette, while you have the mic, because I think this one of the questions I want to ask is, I remember a few years ago you preached a sermon at Impact. It was when and still in the venue, it wasn't at the hotel. And basically the gist of the sermon was like, you can sleep when you're dead. And it was about like growing your capacity. Can you just talk a little bit about that in terms of kind of how you guys have had to grow in capacity and not put ceilings on your life and like, I'm going through kid phase, I'm going through this, whatever it is. Like, you guys just seemed like you said yes to everything. How did you guys personally grow in capacity for the more of God?
Great leaders around us. Dave and Kathy used to lead the church, and they challenged us constantly on going on trips, on doing things, joining, tithing. We didn't understand. They asked us, one day we had a meeting with them because we had sick kids constantly and everything went bad, and we thought they were going to come and pastor us, and the first thing he said is, "Are you tithing?" So he challenged us constantly on things in our lives. So that definitely. And then we got to a point where, at the moment, so my kids are 2 years apart. So we got to a point, Daniel must have been about just over maybe two, then 4 and 6. And there was an opportunity to go to Pakistan. And Rob and I in a prayer meeting, Dave said, "Who's coming to Pakistan with us?" And Daniel was younger than that. And we didn't understand why, but we knew we had to go. So now we sit with 3 kids. What do you do? So we spoke to our leaders, and they prayed with us. But that Friday, we went out with people, new couple, we invited them for lunch, and this girl looked at us and she said, "If you guys ever consider to go on a trip, we'd love to stay with your kids." So we said, that must be God. So we, from the start, made a decision that the kids will not hold us back. They were in worship with us from, Daniel grew up under the chairs. We weren't leading at that point, so it was different, but we just decided they're part of the school. It's not a Rob's call or my call, but actually the family's call. And God has provided, every time we went on a trip, He's provided someone to look after them, family, that whatever it is. So I think that was key for us to is actually just try, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but just go for it. And yeah, I don't know.
But I want to say to you, it's costly, but it's worth it. Yeah. And my children don't have limps. They don't shake their heads funnily. They love Jesus. And they really, my boy used to grow up under the chairs, as Led said, and by 11 he was on the band. And he's an amazing worshiper. He loves Jesus. They see what you do. They catch what you are. They don't necessarily listen to what you say, as you might know, Spirit. But they catch what you are and who you've become. And so that was so important for us. I remember that first trip to Pakistan. I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 10-month-old, like that, just around that age. And when the taxi came to fetch us at the gate, my little 5-year-old Anne came and grabbed my leg And she started weeping, and she said, Daddy, don't leave us, don't leave us. And suddenly I thought, oh, we're in Doha. We don't have grandma and grandpa staying next door, or uncle and auntie down there. If we were to die, or something happened in Pakistan, what would happen to our kids? It was all these fears came over me, and she's weeping, and I had to unclutch her little hands like this. But here's the amazing thing. When Anaid turned 18, she went on an apostolic trip with me to Pakistan. And she preached at one of the services, and 40 kids got saved. And she was the little girl who had to unclutch her little hands when she was a 5-year-old. And years later, fast forward, she saw all the salvation. I said, my little girl, you don't understand the profoundness of what's just happening around you. And so we didn't know these things, but we trusted God, and as best as and we made mistakes all the time. But God was kind, and He is kind, and He's gracious. That's what He says about Himself.
Rob, can you so obviously you came into eldership, eventually you took over the church, I think about 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And do you want to just talk about the difference of kind of being on team and then kind of leading the team and the weight, and we can both talk about
Honestly, we were so incredibly blessed to have in the natural unbelievable fathers. My father is an amazing man, and so is Elette's father. They are just, thank God for them all the time, and our moms. And then God gave us this other man and woman, Dave and Kathy Wallen. I cannot say enough about them. But, when Starla talks about honoring fathers, my goodness gracious, the Bible is clear. Honor them and it'll go well with you. And when you do that, even if it's difficult to do it, I mean, many people here would honor Mike Altringham or whoever the others they might have been. And I want to say there's such rich blessing in that. And we grew to love Dave and Kathy and not always agree with him, but it was okay. But I knew that I could follow him. And they were trustworthy. So they were so kind to us. And so serving on his team in 2005, we came onto eldership, and we served on his team, and it was brilliant. And I just said, I'm going to try and do my best for whatever I could. And so when 2008 came, and we came then full-time, God spoke to us about coming full-time. It was amazing. And so we became such dear friends. We used to go and eat with them. We pushed into them all the time. And so we would come and make a tea date or go and have coffee. And we would, whenever there was a trip, we'd go together. And we went to LTTs and all the training times. And we'd come to Dubai often. That's why we were here so regularly. But so we really just said, actually, as much as we can lead, a little bit that we can, we've got to continue just to see who's walking ahead of us. And we followed as best as we could. So when it later that happened and we got to lead, we'd served on another man's team for nearly 6 years, 7 years nearly, 6 years. And so it was, I don't know, it just sort of happened, And so when we led, we understood team. We understood what it meant to follow, and we understood, I think, what it meant to lead. And the difference between serving and then leading is significant. It really is significant. And I cannot stress it. It's not because we don't do this out of our strength. You really do it. In fact, David would say to me when Dave was being deported and things were going wrong, and he said, come on, Rob, are you taking over the job? Are you taking over? And all the time I said, but God hasn't spoken to me. And I knew that if I said yes to him, but not to God when God spoke, I'd die within a year. Because I could see what a load it was upon him. And it was a massive role. And so I waited. And here actually in Dubai at a meeting, God spoke to me about us leading. But we were all the time still trying to figure out Dave's visa and all the things for him to stay. And so when I got back to Doha, I thought, how do I tell someone that God's spoken to me about taking over his job? I thought, this is the man I love. How can I even say that to him? And I was sitting in my office, Monday morning, 7:15, dropped the kids off, and at 7:20, the phone rang. Dave said, my visa has just been declined for the last time. I have 2 months to leave. And I thought, 48 hours before God had spoken to us, and we hadn't had time to sit down with him about it. And the timing of God, the word of God was unbelievable. And let me tell you, he does build his church. We just do not have to strive. We do not have to, we push, of course we push, but we don't try and force it. We just follow and love and work and partner with God. And so God did, and that's how it opened up. And then when we went in and we'd had that confirmation of do it, we could then do it because we knew God was doing it. And it wasn't easy. It's never been easy, but it was God. And so we had confidence to do it in that.
I think it kind of links to the similar question, but now you have a team, you have leaders around you. What are some of the aspects that you look for when you're looking for leaders? Guys, girls, anyone?
Preach a little bit about that later.
Okay, cool.
I just want to say one thing. I just want to say one thing about trying to find leaders. We look at people that ask questions. So often you go for a meal with someone and they want to just tell their whatever's happening. But when you start asking questions, there's something more in that person. They want to learn. They want to hear that. So that's a great thing for you guys. Just ask questions wherever you go. When you have time with other leaders, ask questions, their journey, their whatever it is. For me, that's the key.
That's awesome. Let you can answer, and Rob as well. Just, you guys have been in ministry a while. You would have seen some key leaders, maybe even amongst you guys, where their marriages have fallen apart. There's whatever's happening. But just can you talk about the importance of, obviously, just kind of marriage and just the importance of keeping the flame within the marriage, but also like leading yourself within that. So,
yeah, before God gave me any gifts, one of the gifts He's given me, and the first gift He's given to me is my wife, because my children are not even mine. They're His. And so the gift He's given me is my wife. And so if God has chosen to give a gift to me, then surely it's got to be a precious gift. And so that's the reality for her. And He also knows that although she's the gift to me, she knows that I love Jesus more than her. So that's not a competition. It means a security for her. Because because I love Him, I'll be faithful to her. And so we try to just keep that balance and that order right, to seek first the kingdom, and then all will be added unto us. And so with the children too, they know. And once or twice they try and manipulate you. And not once or twice, maybe 5 or 6 times a day. No, and so they learn that this is God's gift to me, this being my wife, and that Jesus is the first thing that we seek. So therefore, there's order in that whole process. They can throw tantrums, but eventually they realize, hey, that's dumb, and that's really stupid. And so they get into the right order of things. So for us, that's important to remember the basics. I was talking with a man. We're going through a series called Back to Basics in Doha at the moment, just on basic stuff. And I was talking to a man, and he said, when you go into special forces, and you want to be really, if you're in the Marines or whatever, you got to know the basics really well. And so you can't go and count and blow up cities if you don't know how to do the basics well. So these basics are the first things we need to do well before we can go and count more for God.
And I also think it's good to be accountable. We all have to walk with someone and be accountable to someone else. Just about your marriage struggles, whatever it is. For us, accountability is huge. Make time for one another. Make time for fun. Ministry is tough. You guys know it. It is tough. So make time for fun, to just do stuff that you like doing together. It's not always a lot of time to do that, but we do try to do that, and just be honest with one another as well.
Just to add on to that, and then just in the relationship, there's honor and there's gift recognition, and so there's no competition. So it doesn't have to be, Let's voice is better than mine, or I'm better than. I very quickly saw that she could prophesy way more than I can. And so you've got to be secure in that. I've got to celebrate that. If this is what God's made, my protection is to protect that and to work and nurture with it. And then actually what it does, it stirs me. And so there's this incredible partnership that comes. So there's got to be security in the men particularly, but also wives, don't shy back because your husband is a front runner and you think that's all right, I can just bask in his shade. Because there's actually, God's called us both together for what He wants to do.
I hope it's okay asking this question. You don't have to answer it because Star said it's okay if I ask you. No.
Yes, I
No. Your sister passed away last year. Can you just talk around how you dealt with grief and even still leading, but also dealing with this incredible pain that you've had to walk through? Sorry, I just went from yeah, but...
No, it's a good question. I think it's important for all of us to somehow learn how to walk with that. I think because my sister suffered from depression, and it's been a long time coming, in a way, it wasn't a huge surprise. So somehow God has prepared our hearts for that. My one thing that God really, His kindness done to me is, in February, my sister tried to commit suicide and she failed. And I had an opportunity, I was there to visit after that, and I sat with her, and she said, I don't know why every time God, it failed, and I had an opportunity to ask her, where would you have been if this did work last time? And I led her to the Lord. And I know I'm not going to go in a discussion of where someone is that committed suicide, but I do believe she responded to the gospel there. She maybe not have followed and got her life in order, but she did respond to Jesus. And so the kindness of God for me to have that conversation with her, that really afterwards just gave me a lot of...
Because the next month, lockdown came.
Yeah, so then lockdown happened, and she died in end of July. And again, Rob was with me. So I'm so grateful I didn't have to go through that on my own. God made a way that I was in South Africa at that point for the whole lockdown. Rob was with me. And yes, I had incredible people praying with me. Just our team of elders, the ladies, and some of them has been through the process of losing someone, but also losing towards the same. So they helped me a lot in just praying and working through it. But it is a constant. It's not a thing that just tomorrow it's better. You think of it often, and you then just take it to God again and just ask for the constant healing and helping and.
And with grief, there needs to be real vulnerability, real honesty, and real space for the truth of God to come. Because it's tough, and we all go through it in some way or another. And so we've got to, in those moments, we process it differently, but Hillette handled it really, really well. And actually, it was incredible, because the day after we buried her sister, and I preached at the funeral, and the next day Hillette had to go for a very, very important operation. And that night, after the funeral, we flew back home, and she was very, very, very desperately ill and nearly died. And so it was a very, very tough time, especially for her parents, having lost the daughter the one day and the next day the other daughter's in a really serious position in hospital. So the whole thing was a challenge, but being vulnerable, being truthful, being open, and not being too proud to accept advice and love from others, particularly love and care. People are kind, but they don't know. You know, the Bible says, call the elders when you're sick. I have this often discussion, and then people say, then I hear after the fact something's happened. I say, I didn't know it happened. I said, but the Bible says, call the elders when you're sick. You know, and that was just an illustration. So I said, if we tell people what's going on in our lives, people can help us and share and be able to support us through those moments.
I'd say it kind of linked with that. I just know you go through tough moments in ministry. What has been your toughest moment? You don't have to mention people or anything like details, but what was in terms of that you had to kind of deal with, but then also how did you deal with it?
Sure. Probably very badly.
Yeah.
No, the last 18 months has probably been the toughest time of our time in church. It was just who was prepared for this? And so church-wise was difficult. Being apart from one another was really difficult. Not being able to pastor people in the way that you can. Everything is virtual. Now you've got this whole community. You don't see them. Even if I walked into the church and saw someone in road 27 and just fist bumped, it was a means of pastoring because I touched him and I said hello to him. Now, you had 18 months where all of that was removed. And so unless I woke up in the morning or had a specific list, and no matter what programs we went through, many people felt unpastored. And it's real. And it's so you're sitting on this side because you know you're doing your absolute best, but you know there's disappointment on the other side. And so when you're dealing with disappointment, it's very tough. And so we've had to manage our hearts, how to deal with that and understand and being gracious to people. And at the same time, helping them to manage their expectations. Because ultimately, we don't point them to ourselves, we point them to Jesus. And so they might be disappointed with me, but surely with him, they can't be. And so we've got to be able to lead them through that disappointment. But it's very tough. So that's been, this whole season has been a tough time. But I think we made many mistakes, but one thing we held on to, the things that God had said and what he was doing and the promises he'd given, and we just said, we're just going to continue to lead regardless. And sadly, some have AWOL'd along the way. It's for those in the army terms, they've absent without leave. They just ducked. Some, sadly, are disappointed. And I had twice, I preached on disappointment. And actually, I apologized to the guys. I said, you need to know there's only a man sitting here. So that was difficult, but ultimately, like Nehemiah, we've got a great task ahead of us, and we can't be distracted by Gershom the Arab and Sanballat the Horonite, and who's the other one, Tobiah. We've got to continue with this precious job, and then hopefully lead people back into mission, because around the gospel and around mission, there's such unity. And so you might have an issue with my hairstyle, but when you get to look at Jesus and stop looking at the guy who's just pointing you to him, you're in a whole different way.
Okay, it's 10:30. Just a quick little question. What would you tell your 18-year-old self in hindsight? Fun little ending one.
If I knew what I knew now, at 18, I would have gone for it. I wouldn't have, I made a lot of mistakes, and the world and all the nice things of the world, but I always, in a way, thought, it's boring, these missionaries going, and it's boring. But what an adventure. What an adventure. And I would, even today, tell the teenagers and the youngsters, this is the most extraordinary adventure you can ever be on. You see the nations, you see people saved, you see God at work, you see community. I would just say, go for it, and don't doubt this beautiful Jesus.
I don't know what to add on to that. It's just, just absolutely, just go for it and enjoy all the goodness of God. If I think of the adventures we had, one of the pictures God gave me here in Dubai when he said, take over from Dave and Kathy, was he gave me a picture of a super tube. Now, for those South Africans will know what that is. It's like Wild Wadi. And he gave me a picture of that after he spoke to me about just the leading. And I said, Lord, what does this mean? And when I was a kid, I absolutely loved it. A farm boy, go to the city, go down the super tube, it's great. And he said, it's going to be fast, it's going to be fun, and it's going to be greater than you can ever fathom or imagine. And truly, to us, it has in fact been that. And so it's far better. And when we try and make our plans, we can make a little bit. But my goodness, when we trust into his plans, it really is beyond what you can imagine. So that's what I would just say to them.
That's awesome. Cool. So we're going to be back at 11 o'clock on the dot. Go grab some food. I don't know if 11 o'clock, just be here. There's lots of food outside. Enjoy yourselves. Catch up with people. 11 o'clock.